All right, let's jump right in, shall we? Today, we're going to be taking a deep dive into the 1990 murder of Talana Kreeger. And we're working with a fascinating source here, a Spanish-language true crime video. This case, it's one of those stories that just really gets under your skin. You know, it makes you think about how quickly things can change and how prejudice can exist even in communities that you think are open and accepting.
Yeah, I agree. What struck me, when I was researching this case was how much Talana's story reflects the complexities of the time, especially when you think about LGBTQ plus acceptance. It's more than just a murder. It's like a glimpse into societal biases and the dangers those biases create.
Yeah. And at the center of it all is Talana, a woman who built a life for herself in Wilmington, North Carolina, after overcoming a really difficult childhood. You know, the video paints this really vivid picture of her. She sounds like an amazing person, a skilled carpenter, a lover of animals, just incredibly generous.
Right. It's like her strength and independence almost made her a target, which is a chilling thought, right? She had this whole network of friends, she owned a farm, and she was always helping others. It's just tragic that her kindness might have been what made her vulnerable.
That's a good point. And speaking of her friends, they play a big role in this story. We're introduced to Wanda, who owned the Parkview Grill, and Heidi, both close to Talana. So it's February 21st, 1990. They're all at the Parkview just hanging out, talking about renovations, something Talana often helped Wanda with, casual stuff. Then this truck driver, Ronald Sheldon Thomas, he walks in.
Yeah, the video describes a pretty relaxed vibe in the bar. Drinks, pool, just a typical night at a local spot. Ronald even let the women check out his truck, so there's no hint of tension or anything.
And it gets even more casual later on. They decide to go to Hardee's to grab a bite, and Talana decides to ride with Ronald in his truck while Heidi follows in her car. And as we'll learn, that decision has devastating consequences.
It's almost heartbreaking when you think about it, right? Talana felt safe enough to ride with him while her friend was close behind. It just shows how quickly our sense of security can be shattered.
You're telling me. So Heidi gets to Hardee's and realizes she lost track of the truck, and obviously panic starts to set in. Wanda shows up and joins the search, but there's no sign of Talana or Ronald. They've just vanished. And this is where Wanda's quick thinking comes into play. Remember how Talana was always helping people? Well, that ended up being crucial in Ronald's downfall.
Yeah, it's amazing how these seemingly small details can end up being so important in an investigation. It turns out Ronald had mentioned a delivery he had to make to Hoggart High School. And Wanda, she uses that little piece of information to track him down. She even confirms his identity and his company. It's almost like something you'd see in a movie.
Wow, talk about resourceful.
Yeah.
But when she confronts Ronald about Talana, he denies ever meeting her. Talk about a red flag. I mean, come on, you were just hanging out with him.
That sudden change from friendly and open to evasive is definitely a sign that something's wrong. Like he's trying to hide something. And then, get this, he ends up confessing to a local priest. He admits to killing Talana. He claims they got into an argument about her sexuality and things escalated.
Man, it's just incredibly sad that someone's sexual orientation could be used to justify violence like that. It really puts the societal context of this case into perspective. But here's the thing. Ronald's confession, it's like he's trying to make it seem like a crime of passion, a sudden outburst. But the truth, as we'll find out, is far more disturbing. The forensic evidence paints a very different picture.
Right, that's where the real horror of this crime starts to come to light. We need to talk about the discovery of Talana's body and the stark contrast between Ronald's confession and the reality of what happened to her. Yeah, the video doesn't shy away from describing the condition Talana was found in. They use terms like brutal and tremendous when talking about her injuries. You can almost feel the shock and horror in the video creators' voices, even though they've probably seen a lot.
It's tough to even think about the rage involved in something like that. And as the forensic evidence comes to light, it becomes clear that Ronald's confession was just a way to try and downplay what he did. He claims he stopped when Talana started bleeding, but the reality is much worse.
The video shows crime scene photos, and honestly, it's hard to look at them. The level of brutality goes way beyond what he initially admitted to. Talana suffered massive internal injuries, even displaced organs, and the damage to her genital area, it indicates a level of rage and sadism that just doesn't match up with his story about an argument.
It's sickening, honestly. And on top of the brutality of the crime, the societal response just adds another layer of tragedy. The video talks about how some authorities and even members of the community seem more focused on Talana's sexuality than on the violence she suffered.
That's what gets to me about this case. Instead of focusing on the crime and getting justice for Talana, people were gossiping about her personal life. It's victim blaming at its worst, and it shows how deep homophobia was ingrained in society back then.
It's unbelievable, you know. Imagine being murdered and then having your character questioned instead of the person who killed you.
It just shows how prejudice can warp people's perceptions.
Yeah.
Even when they're confronted with a horrific crime like this, it's a reminder that achieving real equality takes constant vigilance and a willingness to challenge harmful stereotypes.
You're absolutely right. And it gets worse. The video even mentions that several churches in Wilmington refused to bury Talana because she was gay. It's heartbreaking that even in death, she was denied dignity and respect just because of who she loved.
Yeah, that really highlights the homophobia that was prevalent in religious institutions back then. Imagine being denied a proper burial simply because of who you loved. It shows how deep prejudice was embedded in society, even in places that claimed to be about love and acceptance.
It's a chilling reminder of the discrimination that LGBTQ plus individuals faced, and sadly, continue to face in some places. But in the midst of all this darkness, there is a glimmer of hope. The video highlights the strength and determination of Wanda and Heidi. They fought so hard to give Talana a proper burial, they refused to let prejudice dictate how their friend would be remembered.
Their courage is truly inspiring. They didn't let grief paralyze them. They took their pain and turned it into action. They became powerful advocates for the LGBTQ plus community. Their story shows the power of love and resilience, even in the face of unimaginable loss.
It's amazing. They even helped establish a church that welcomes everyone, regardless of sexual orientation. It's a direct response to the hate and exclusion they experienced. It's a powerful legacy that honors Talana's memory and shows how positive change can come from even the darkest of times.
It's a good reminder that we all have a responsibility to speak out against injustice and fight for a world where everyone feels safe and accepted for who they are.
Exactly. Now let's talk about the trial and what happened to Ronald legally. He was arrested based on his confession and the mountain of evidence against him. His defense strategy, as you might expect, was kind of a long shot.
Yeah, according to the video, he tried to plead intoxication and insanity, claiming that he wasn't in control of his actions that night. But considering how brutal the crime was and the fact that he tried to cover his tracks, it seems pretty obvious that he knew exactly what he was doing.
Right. It's hard to believe that someone could be that violent just because they were drunk or angry. The level of premeditation and the specific injuries Talana suffered point to something far more sinister. I think the prosecution did a good job of making that clear.
Yeah, they likely argued that Ronald's homophobia was the driving force behind his actions. And the evidence definitely backs that up. In the end, the jury saw through his defense. They found him guilty and sentenced him to 2 life sentences with a minimum of 40 years.
Well, that sentence means he'll be held accountable for his actions. It also raises a difficult question about what justice really means in a case like this. I mean, no amount of prison time can bring Talana back or heal the pain her loved ones went through. It really makes you think, what does justice actually mean in a case like this? 2 life sentences. It's a harsh punishment, but it can't bring Talana back or erase the pain her loved ones have gone through. And like we talked about, the prejudice that made Talana vulnerable in the first place, that hasn't gone away.
Yeah, it's a sobering thought. Talana's story, while it's specific to her time and place, it reflects these bigger issues that still exist today. Hate crimes driven by homophobia, transphobia, racism, all sorts of bigotry. It's still happening. It reminds us that the fight for equality isn't over.
You're right. And that's what makes Wanda and Heidi's story so powerful.
Right.
They didn't give in to despair. They chose to honor Talana by fighting for a more just and inclusive world. They took their grief and turned it into action, becoming these incredible advocates for the LGBTQ plus community.
Their activism really shows the human spirit's ability to find strength and purpose, even after something so horrible. They challenged the very institutions that failed Talana. They demanded accountability and worked to create a more welcoming and accepting environment for everyone.
Absolutely. And the church they helped establish, the one that welcomes everyone regardless of sexual orientation, that's a perfect example of their commitment to change. They took a stand against hate and built a space where love and acceptance can thrive.
It's a powerful reminder that we can't be silent when we see injustice. We all have a responsibility to speak out against discrimination, to challenge harmful stereotypes, and to fight for equality in all its forms.
So after taking this deep dive into this case with all its complexities and tragedy, what do you think is the biggest takeaway for our listeners?
Well, Talana's story, as heartbreaking as it is, it really highlights how important empathy and understanding are. And it shows that we need to work together to dismantle the systems that allow hate and discrimination to flourish. It's a reminder that staying silent when you see injustice is basically the same as supporting it. We need to be allies and use our voices to create a world where stories like Talana's become things of the past.
That's a powerful message. And it's not just about big, sweeping changes. It's about the choices we make every day. How we treat each other, the words we use, the biases we challenge in ourselves and our communities. It's about building a culture of respect and inclusion, where everyone feels safe, valued, and free to be themselves.
Yeah, this case has definitely given me a lot to think about. It's easy to get caught up in the details of the crime itself, but the real value of this deep dive is the conversations it starts about social justice, equality, and the ongoing fight for a more inclusive world.
I couldn't agree more. And for me, the takeaway is simple. We can't let tragedies like Talana's be forgotten. We have to learn from them, honor the victims by working for change, and build a future where everyone can live freely and openly without fear of violence or discrimination.
Well said. And to our listeners, we leave you with this question. What will you do to help create that future? How will you use your voice and your actions to build a world where stories like Talana's are just stories of the past, not warnings for the present?
That's a great question to think about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.